Hey, 7th grade friends. This is your first lesson via video. I wanted to go over what we talked about before we left on the 13th. We were talking about rational numbers. You should have your notes from where we talked about what a rational number is. That is a number that is written in A over B form, basically written as a fraction. That's a rational number. We also spent some time talking about the inverse property of addition, the inverse property of multiplication, the multiplicative identity, or the identity property of multiplication and the identity property of addition. You need to go back and look at your notes. I'm going to try and find a tutorial video to link to the lesson also for you to watch. But just a quick reminder, if we're talking about the additive inverse, the additive inverse or its opposite, remember, is the number that when you add them together, they equal 0. These have to equal 0. So if I've got the number 7, I'm going to add its opposite to make my sum 0. Okay? The additive or the inverse, that's the inverse property. Inverse property. Okay, you guys have used these properties for years. We just probably have never named them like this. So that's what makes these so difficult to kind of remember. This is the inverse property of addition. The identity property, identity property of addition is the sum of a number and the additive identity, which is 0. The additive identity equals 0. Remember that. So if I've got like -7 and I add 0 to it, I still have -7. This is all in a chart, neat and laid out on page 285. The inverse property of multiplication, we're going to use the multiplicative inverse or its reciprocal. Is the reciprocal. Okay, so if I've got 3 halves, I'm going to multiply it by its inverse, or its multiplicative inverse, the reciprocal, and I get 6 over 6, which is 1. Okay? The multiplicative identity is 1. All right? Because if I multiply any number times 1, I get any number. All right, so 1, when you think of identity properties for multiplication, you need to think of 1. When you think of identity properties for addition, 0 is the number that you need to think of. When you add a number and its opposite, it has to equal 0. And when you add 0 to any number, you get any number, okay? So I just wanted to go over real quick about these and then talk about your homework that you guys did before we left for this extended break. Okay, so for number 14 through 17 that you guys did for homework before we left, that's on page 286. They wanted us to show that the number's rational by writing it in an A over B form. Then we needed to give the multiplicative inverse and then the additive inverse of the number. The first number was -2/3. That number is already rational, okay? It's already written in A over B form. The multiplicative inverse for that Now, it has to equal positive 1, so that means that the multiplicative inverse, or the, hold on, gotta think of the word. The number that good night, what am I thinking of? See, this is just like being in class. The reciprocal has to also be negative. So it's gonna be negative 3/2, because when I multiply a negative by a negative, I get a positive. And the inverse property has to be 1, positive 1. And then the additive inverse, if I'm subtracting negative 2/3, I'm gonna add 2/3. That's the answer to number 14. Number 15 was 5 3/7. So the first thing I have to do is I have to change this into an improper fraction, okay? 7 times 5 is 35, and then we add 3 to get 38. 38 over 7, okay? The multiplicative inverse is the reciprocal, and this is positive, so this is also going to be positive. 7 over 38 is the multiplicable inverse. The additive inverse, if I'm adding 38 over 7, the additive inverse is subtracting 38 over 7. Okay, so there's the answer to number 15. Number 16, give us 0.7. 7/10 is a decimal form of the fraction 7 over 10. So there's the answer to that part of it. The multiplicative inverse of 7/10 is 10 over 7, okay? Because if I multiply 7/10 times 10 over 7, I get 70 over 7, which is 1. Just double checking my work here. And then the additive inverse, if I'm adding 7/10, I'm going to subtract 7/10. That's going to be my additive inverse, okay? And then finally, for number 17, they give us 21. The whole number 21. How do I write a whole number as a fraction? Oh wait, we put it over 1. So writing it in rational form is 21 over 1. The multiplicative inverse, or the reciprocal, is 1 over 21. Okay, and if I want the additive inverse, if I am adding 21 over 1, I'm going to subtract 21 over 1. Okay, so there's the answers to the homework problems that you guys did right before we left. And there will be a second video that goes with this lesson, so just stay tuned.